Aye.
Hindi kaya.
Hindi na singadya.
On July 5, 2025, China's southern provinces were once again plunged into chaos as torrential rains, amplified by a deepening low-pressure system and mismanaged flood control measures, wreaked havoc across the region. The Pearl River Basin, already struggling with excess water, faced catastrophic flooding. Cities like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Zhuhai recorded the highest rainfall in decades. Breaking all historical records. The government was slow to respond, and many regions were caught off guard. This wasn't merely a heavy downpour, it was the result of both nature's fury and human negligence. Cities like Guangzhou, Foshan, Dongguan, and Huizhou were overwhelmed in a matter of hours. Floodwaters poured through the streets, submerging buildings up to the rooftops. Entire districts vanished, with people stranded, struggling for survival. Power grids failed, communications collapsed, and the roar of rushing water drowned out all hope. In Guangzhou, rainfall surged to 400 millimeters in just a few hours, flooding entire neighborhoods. Subways became waterlogged, offices were abandoned, and hospitals were flooded, with patients lying in hallways, helpless. Amid the chaos, many residents were unable to access emergency shelters, and hospitals, already overstretched from the pandemic, were rendered ineffective. The government was slow to open emergency channels, and by the time the heavy floodgates of local reservoirs were opened, it was already too late.
我操了，你这是胡整啊！你怎么跑这嘞？哎呀，老爷，这个大棵草，你上这嘞，我吓死了！我醉了。原来没见到。
我去，完蛋了！我去。
Water surged through the city at an alarming rate. Entire neighborhoods were inundated, and rescue efforts became a nightmare. The government's failure to build proper infrastructure was evident, as flood barriers and levees, unable to withstand the downpour, crumbled. Downstream cities, such as Zhongshan and Jiangmen, were blindsided by the flood wave. Villages, once peaceful and safe, were destroyed in minutes. Homes disappeared as floodwaters rose. People clung to trees, rooftops, and anything they could hold onto, desperately trying to survive. One elderly woman, crying out as she was rescued, exclaimed, "This is worse than 2008. We had no warning, no help. Tens of thousands of people were left without power, water, or food. Streets were turned into rivers, and cars were swept away. Whole families were stranded in their homes, unable to escape as the waters rose higher. Volunteers stood in waist-deep water, trying to maintain order amidst the chaos. But their efforts, though brave, were insufficient in the face of such overwhelming force. Meanwhile, the Pearl River and its tributaries like the Zhejiang and Beijiang all surpassed warning levels. The levees, already weakened by years of neglect, gave way to the floodwaters. In Foshan, the Dasha River levee broke during the night, and over 100 hydrological experts warned that if the rains didn't ease in the next 24 hours, even more reservoirs would have to release water, exacerbating the situation. Red flood warnings were issued for multiple provinces, but the response was far too slow. The military and armed police were deployed to areas most at risk, but their efforts were hindered by the overwhelming scope of the disaster. In the rural areas surrounding Guangdong, small boats that had once been used for fishing were now being used to rescue the stranded. But time was running out. In Jiangmen, agricultural lands were destroyed and crops were drowned. Farmers, looking at the ruins of their livelihoods, cried out, "Everything is lost. Our crops, our homes, everything." With over 90 large reservoirs at full capacity and 20 million people affected, the situation grew more dire by the hour. Landslides, road collapses, and missing persons reports flooded in. A child, trapped in a flooded village, sobbed, "I want my mother. I want to go home." The once life-giving Pearl River is now a torrent of destruction, and what was meant to nourish life has turned into a source of devastation. This is not just a natural disaster, it's a painful reminder of the consequences of neglect and poor planning.